hello everyone, and welcome back to Conversations Live radio station at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com, as well as through our friends at iHeartRadio and Amazon Music, as well as Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. We're doing double duty for both our radio show as well as our web series today with a very special guest. We're excited to welcome Director Ellen Frankenstein to our broadcast today. She's celebrating her film Cruise Boom, coming to PBS this month. We're going to talk to her more about that, but also about her journey as a filmmaker. Now, I've had a chance to watch Cruise Boom for myself, and as someone who does a lot of travel, it really is fascinating to be able to get the perspective of the cities that are visited. And this one particular one, a city I've never heard of before, that's in Alaska. We're going to talk to Ellen what it's like for her to be able to hear from the people who live there, but also the impact of tourism on the residents as well. If you guys are just finding out about Ellen, I will let you guys know how to stay connected with her. But Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
I'm honored that you wanted to talk with me and you watched Cruise Boom.
Well, look, I really enjoyed it. I had never heard of Sitka before, so now I can talk to people about Sitka. Ellen, and it was so interesting to me when your conversation was pitched to me initially. I was fascinated as someone who does a lot of travel every month for my work. And I think to myself, a lot of times we don't always think about the impact of travel and tourism on cities. What has it been like for you? Let's start there. What has it been like for you to be a part of that conversation, Ellen, of what happens when so many people are coming to a town and there's supposed success in that industry?
Well, it's interesting because the film follows the community realizing we're going to hit a new boom. We've had tourism in Alaska for a long time, but we kept voting down public docks here, and then a local businessman expanded what was the fishing boat haul out into a dock for cruise ships, and it led to a boom. And he did that expansion with the help of Royal Caribbean. And so I was prodded to make this film because to document the community going through change, because it has been a big change to double the amount of people visiting in the summer.
Yeah.
It's just been a lot for the community. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ellen, to that point, I think this is where I think, and when I was watching the film, it really, and that's why I encourage everyone, as I mentioned, it's coming to PBS this month, definitely watch it, because I think a lot of times, we heard about, how even with the best of intentions, there can be a negative consequence. Your film really shows that, because on one hand, you would think for a city, for a place, it's great, for the economy when people come in, right? But then
of course,
what you allow us to see, though, is that doesn't always take into account the people who have to live there every day and have to deal with the consequences of that. So I guess the obvious question would be, what led you to want to say, this is a story I wanted to tell?
I got to say, some people provoked me to do it. This is not a topic. I've made films for years, and I've made films about teenagers, about grief and healing, a lot of collaborations with Indigenous groups and people. And so this was not a topic. I find it tricky to talk about things related to the economy. It's very complex because we kind of have this growth mentality in life. Like, we got to have more, grow. And so this was I was provoked, and then it was kind of a struggle. I had a lovely co-producer, Atman Mehta, who's now getting his PhD in economic history at the University of Chicago. And he was excited as an outsider to collaborate on the film with me. And it was really fun. The great thing about films is the kind of long process and the collaboration. And so we ended up with Cruise Boom.
Love that. We're going to talk more about that and remind our audience how they can see it. Ellen, but you mentioned about, other work you've done. So let's go backwards for those who are just now finding out about you and your work. What was it about storytelling through film, Ellen, that spoke to you?
Well, I started out doing a lot of documentary still work back in the days of darkrooms. I ran around with an old Rolleiflex. And then I wanted to add voices and sound and scenes. And so I was drawn to documentary filmmaking as a way to talk about things that don't always get talked about. And I think I always say that documentary filmmaking, I'm not an expert in anything. You're just rearranging what's out there and reconfiguring it to create conversation. And I love generating conversation with films.
Love that. Hello to you, Leon Pitts. Good to see you there in Florida on the Instagram side. As I mentioned, we are simulcasting our broadcast, so I see you guys over there on X as well. If you guys have any questions or comments for Ellen, make sure you guys do put those in the chat. I'll be glad to bring those up so we can talk about them. And that brings us to this part, which is why I'm so glad you're here, Ellen, and that are the conversations. It's one thing to love what you do as a filmmaker. What has it been like for you to see the emotions and the conversations that have come from your work?
With all the work or with different people? This film is hard, was fascinating. We actually showed the rough cut to the entire community, which is something I've never done before. And that was super emotional because, change is hard. And whether it's good or bad,
right,
when the place you live changes, you're witnessing kind of possibility, but also loss. So it can be super emotional. But I've also made films that brought up things like self-mutilation and suicide and substance abuse and really emotional topics. So I just always like to do it in a way that there's people in the room to help facilitate the conversation and to realize the film is just the start. It's not the end of anything. And my hope is that some scene, some image, some part of the film will resonate with people.
And I think that's definitely something that has happened. And you mentioned the emotion. And even though that can be something, as you mentioned, change is not easy, that has to be a good feeling, though, Ellen, right? To know that something you created is able to spark that type of feeling.
It's great. And I think another thing about documentary filmmaking that's so amazing is that you kind of get to lift the hood. And while I know nothing about tourism and again was not drawn to make this film, I love the joy of the people who work in tourism. They love what they do. And the people who get to travel, they haven't seen whales, bears, and eagles like we get to see them living in Alaska. And that's joyful. But there are these questions in this case about, what is the cruise ship industry? Is it an industry, and the way we work with it, is it good for the environment? Is it turning our town into a caricature? Is it no longer? I love that one of the students who saw it wrote, I give these little feedback forms, said, how can you be authentic when you're kind of in a performance mode? We also have in the film, we have a segment about indigenous tourism. Yeah. And there's that question of like, again, how do you share your culture, but not kind of dilute it? And which parts of your culture do you share?
And I think that again is what makes it so powerful. Ellen, would you like for us to share the trailer with our audience?
Oh, please go for it.
Okay, so again, as I mentioned, Ellen's film is it's called Cruise Boom. It's coming to PBS this month, starting on September the 14th. We're going to remind you of that. But for those who are just finding out about it, may want to find out more information about it, here is a look at the trailer for Cruise Boom. We're going to have more of our conversation with Ellen after this.
Around 480,000 cruise passengers are expected to travel to Sitka this summer. On the biggest days of the cruise season, Sitka could double in size. Globally, the cruise industry is booming. And with that staggering increase come a lot of questions.
How does our community handle the numbers of people coming to town? And how can visitors have a good experience in Sitka? And how can Sitkans still feel like this is Sitka?
As someone who was born and raised here, I feel like I'm witnessing my community change right in front of me.
So the only real question is, do we want to get ready for it or just let the flood come?
But you can't keep people from coming.
Well,
They want to come here.
but they want to come to Sitka. They don't want to come to Disneyland.
No.
And if we continue to erode what makes Sitka Sitka, they're not going to want to come.
I don't want us to be a destination. I value our community because we're a community and we're proud of showing it off to people. There's a level that is a responsible amount of tourism. And then there's a level where it's traffic jams of buses and people who are frustrated and impatient with the tourists, and neither the residents nor the tourists having a good experience because we've gone too far.
You're not alone. Now, more than ever, there are communities that are beginning to ask questions about what kind of tourism do you want? What kind of cruise tourism do you want? What kind of limits should be placed on it? And how do you ensure that the cruise industry pays its fair share?
How does any community figure out what's best for all of us? Even if we can figure that out, do we have the levers we need to shape that?
Such a powerful trailer there, Ellen, and the film, as I mentioned, definitely want to invite our audience to be able to watch this when it's available on PBS. I want to talk about what that experience has been like, because that, of course, is how I found out about Cruise Boom. I heard from your publicist about it coming. I mean, how does it feel to know that you're going to have that platform to be able to share not only the people of Sitka, but also the message of Cruise Boom when it comes to these important questions about tourism and community?
Well, I always say there's not a lot of financial gain from these projects, but I'm all about the eyeballs. Again, I like seeing what the story, how it resonates with people, what kind of questions it creates for them. I mean, some folks have seen the film, don't think about how they travel. Lots of folks do. The film includes a little bit of critique and digging into how the cruise industry works and that they're registered offshore. And for a lot of people, they don't know that, or that the labor practices, what they're like. We just hint about a lot of things and asking the questions again about environmental impacts and all those type of issues. So it's exciting, but it also feels overwhelming because, film is only like a fragment of a much deeper reality.
Right. Even in that trailer, though, hello to you, Tanya White. Good to be able to see you joining us there in Indiana. Leon says, this goes to the point. Leon, who was in Florida, joining us on Instagram, says, I would like to visit. And I think that's the thing here. And I think that's that the trailer piqued my interest, but actually seeing the film and seeing the community come together to express their concerns, but also I think the impact, good, what some could say good and bad. And this is where it does get tricky, though, Ellen, because I think depending on how you feel about tourism, depending on how you feel about the impact of tourism on the economy, for the good or bad, will kind of ultimately determine how you feel about this film, right?
I think so. I mean, I think this is a type of topic that's unlike some of the other topics I've made films about, where some folks will say that is a super balanced film, and other people will say it's negative because it questions something that does help. Since this cruise boom, we have new small businesses, we have food trucks, we have new tour businesses. There's a lot of energy. We're getting more sales tax. So you can argue, and all of that is true, but as someone who is helping me kind of organize screenings says, there can be multiple truths at the same time. Yes. And it's okay. And I think one of the repeated refrains, it almost is like a hammer hitting people's heads, is that we need to have dialogues and communities need to have conversations. And when you ask a question, you're not a critic. You're thinking about your community and can it be a place that's livable for everybody?
Yeah, I think that is it, right? I think that is the big thing from this. So with that being said, and with the way we built this conversation, and I really love the way it's kind of organically formed itself, Ellen, what did you leave the film with as the filmmaker? What did you leave it with?
Well, I think I've made a series of films that end on question marks. Okay. You know how narratives usually end and there's love and rainbows or whatever it is and happily ever after. I mean, I was struck with this deep kind of almost pain of not really having answers and left with my own ambivalence about travel. Like, I feel like more reluctant about traveling and even though I too enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are two things.
Yeah, it is one of those powerful things. Now, let me tell you the other big impact for me as a viewer, though. And even though, watching it, and I'm so glad I got a chance to see it before this conversation, what I thought about was that this could be any place USA in many ways, because we all are wrestling with, I think about the city where I live, there is a big push right now for bringing in, of course, as you mentioned, the dollars, being able to bring in, the people from the outside to be able to build up that art community, especially when it comes to concerts in my city. We have a large amphitheater that's recently been built. And so that's been one of the conversations. So when I watched Cruise Boom, I thought about in Brandon, Mississippi, where I live outside of Jackson, how citizens have had that same thing about the traffic, the people coming in, and the impact of that when you have, these big bands and, individuals coming into town. Is that what you hope also we're able to localize this in some way as we kind of think about our own lives?
Totally. And I've heard Brandon's an amazing place. Yes, to think about our own lives, because as I mentioned, a student from University of San Francisco saw the film and compared it to Elon Musk moving into her town in Brownsville, Texas. Someone else talked about hospitals merging and that impact in their community outside New York. So I think it's both tourism and it's thinking about our relationship to kind of economic growth and kind of these things that move into our communities.
Yeah.
That bring possibility, but also I think we have to keep asking these questions. Is this good? How is everything trickling down? How is it? One of the things the film brings up, and we all know this issue, housing. Like, if independent travelers stay in short-term rentals. We're having housing crises because so many more people are in town. So, there's all these other issues.
Right. Such a great point. Cheryl, hello to you over on IG. Leon brings up a good point, too, that go along with our conversation here. Ellen, he says, I would like to visit. I agree that it should stay in its original state so that people can experience its national community. He gets that one would, of course, like, to have the original, landmarks and everything there. And I think that's the thing to appreciate, because, again, Ellen, as I mentioned, I would never have heard of Sitka if it had not been for this film. So in that way, I think it is educating people about a place that many of us here in Mississippi have never heard of before, right? But I think it also, in the point I was trying to make earlier, makes us think about our own habits and our own place and the impact we're having on others, right? And I think that's the great thing about a film like this.
Yeah. But we're not going to have impacts. I made another fun and serious film called Eating Alaska about being a vegetarian in Alaska, trying to figure out what to eat. And it brings up all these things. And by existing, we're going to have impacts. We can't not. But how to do that well? I don't have the answers, but I do think there is that thing of like, do you try to support the local businesses? Do you choose when you go to a place? Do you try to go to places that aren't being over-toured? Because we know if you look in the news, Barcelona, Amsterdam, Greece, other places in the US, there's a lot of pushback right now about like, too many people are here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's it. I appreciate you guys over there on X. If you guys have any questions or comments on X, please let us know. Again, Ellen, so glad we had a chance to talk. So glad we've had this conversation. Again, the film is called Cruise Boom. It is going to be premiering on PBS this month. It also will be on pbs.org as well. So make sure you guys look out for that starting on September the 14th. Ellen, for our audience out there, how can they stay connected with you and kind of keep up with the updates about the film and other work you're doing?
Well, for one thing, you can also find the film if you go to public libraries on Canopy, and you can find some other films that I've collaborated on Canopy. You can follow us on Instagram, Cruise Boom Film. You can find us on Facebook under Art Change or under 14 Miles Alaska. I also did this fun series called 14 Miles Alaska, 14 Miles, all about 37 short films about Sitka. If you happen to show up in town, try to contact me. My name is Ellen Frankenstein. And one last thing I want to say about the film, I wanted people to feel torn. I wanted them to see the beauty, but also feel conflicted. So if I could succeed in doing that, let me know.
Love that. I think you've achieved that. And even like I said, as someone who travels monthly for work, I go to a lot of places. And I think, again, most of us, and I can speak for myself personally here, but I think other people feel the same way. We just think about what we want to do, where we want to go, what we want to see. we don't think about the impact of the people that are already there. And I know I don't. I'm just going where I want to go. I mean, that's just the truth. We don't think about. I wonder what the citizens are going to think about. All of these people, coming in, and we just walk into restaurants and stuff, and we don't think about that. And I think this film does allow us to see the perspective of the people who inhabit the places that we visit, and to get their perspective. And I think that's been missing. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I really appreciate having the conversation.
Yeah, but look, the pleasure's definitely been all mine. And we thank your audience for joining us on the radio dial at WYAD 94.1 FM, WYADonline.com, as well as through iHeartRadio and Amazon Music, as well as those simulcasting for Cyrus Webb Presents at Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, X. And Ellen, it goes without saying, you're welcome back here anytime.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And take care, everyone who's listening, and travel well. And again, Cruise Boom will be streaming on pbs.org. It'll be on individual stations. You can ask your station to play it. And thanks for watching. And I always appreciate eyeballs on the films that I get to make.
Yeah, it's our pleasure as well. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live in Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, you all make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.